San Francisco's Castro district. This neighborhood once supported a thriving gay community. It was a real and symbolic oasis for gays nationally. But Castro's traditional residents are moving out, and its role as an iconic gay neighborhood is clearly in decline. This is not an isolated case. Long-established gay ghettos are disappearing throughout the United States. Dr. Derek Eisenbach, social geographer and urban planner, introduces the two main interpretations of why this is happening.
The post-gay thesis suggests that trends in society have rendered gay neighborhoods irrelevant. Gays no longer want nor necessarily need to live in the neighborhoods they have been living in for the past few decades. This reflects progressive change in society. The gentrification thesis suggests that economic booms have driven gays out of their neighborhoods. Gay neighborhoods are essentially sites of struggle as gays try to maintain a foothold in their communities.
In this film, we review why and how the Castro evolved into a gay community, describe the Castro's economic and political rise, explore the post-gay and gentrification theses of its decline, consider why the gay community may still need a place of its own, and finally, argue that its loss has ramifications for broader society. Dr. Eisenbach takes us to San Francisco to help explain the story.
San Francisco is arguably the most socially progressive city in America today, but it wasn't always that way. In the 1960s, gays and lesbians of San Francisco faced hatred and discrimination, much like gays and lesbians in other parts of the country. Most gays were in the closet. They hid their sexuality out of fear of violence or social marginalization. But this response hid homosexuals from each other as well. Gays and lesbians couldn't even identify one another in everyday life. So gays established places for themselves, bars and bathhouses, where they could emerge from the closet in a safe space and socialize with other gays. But even these spaces were vulnerable. We're in the Tenderloin outside a building that formerly housed Compton's Cafeteria. In the 1960s, Compton's was a hangout spot for drag queens and transsexuals. But the staff didn't like that. So they called the police and demanded that these queens were arrested on the grounds that cross-dressing was still illegal. Gay activists responded by picketing and occupying the restaurant, touching off a series of riots.
We had to fight for our rights as not gay people, but as human beings.
This incident highlighted the need for a safe neighborhood for the gay community.
Professor Dawn Romsberg of Sonoma State's Department of Women and Gender Studies clarifies why the Tenderloin did not provide the kind of space that many gays wanted.
So the Tenderloin represents an older kind of gay community. It's a community where you have street drugs, you have sex work, the police are sort of heavily surveilling it. It's what used to be called a vice district. And the Castro represents a kind of post-liberation gay neighborhood. You have gay bars, certainly gay bathhouses, but also things like gay doctors and gay lawyers and gay barbers. It's a kind of neighborhood where you can live your life as out and gay and not fear the same kinds of harassment or persecution that you might in many other parts of the country or the world.
Before the Castro became that gay safe haven neighborhood as it's known now, it was inhabited by working class Irish American families up and through the 1950s. But as the city began to deindustrialize, these families moved across the bay following that industry and those jobs. Gays looked to the Castro. They had low crime, low rent, and cheap houses, and they began to move in and fix up these Victorians here. Castro was no different than the rest of San Francisco's business neighborhoods. Very neighborhood-oriented and catered to a mainstream population of residents. But over time, signs began to emerge that perhaps these businesses were catering to a different population.
While the Castro came to symbolize a post-liberation gay space in broad terms, it actually represented a particular segment of the gay community.
So it became a place that was part of a great gay imaginary. It was sort of a place where nationally and then worldwide it was considered as a place of homecoming for all LGBT people. But very quickly it became a place that the predominant business owners, the predominant people who could afford to buy houses, were white and middle class or wealthy gay men. And as that happened, the promise of it as a place of homecoming for all LGBT people was often not fulfilled for lesbians and for transgender people, for people of color, for low-income people who came to the neighborhood and didn't always find it as welcoming as they had wanted.
By the late 70s and early 80s, the neighborhood had grown. Gay business owners were promoting the reputation of the Castro as a gay mecca. The neighborhood began attracting gay tourist dollars from around the world, and its economic power grew. The community then translated that economic power into political power, beginning with the first openly gay person elected to the city's Board of Supervisors.
A key component of that process was San Francisco's system of political representation. Until 1974, the city's Board of Supervisors was elected at large in citywide elections. The minority gay community had little hope of gaining political representation. But in 1974, the city was divided into representative districts, with each district electing its own representative to the board. The Castro was placed in a district with its liberal neighbor, the Haight, and in that political bloc, the Castro was able to leverage its growing economic and demographic power to elect Harvey Milk into office in 1977. Those districts have since changed, but the Castro has still managed to use this demographic voting bloc to send gay supervisors to City Hall ever since.
Milk was assassinated after just 11 months in office, but not before he secured important legislation for his constituents. But as Dr. Rumsberg explains, Milk's political priorities largely reflected the needs of Castro's upper-middle-class white population.
So some of the priorities that come out of that political agenda are things like working with the police to make sure that there is policing to have safe streets in the Castro, making sure that non-discrimination ordinances and policies across city government include sexual orientation. What gets left out of that agenda, however, are things like fighting for economic justice and livability for all people in the neighborhood. You even have a very famous example in the late 1990s where there's a push to have a gay youth homeless shelter centered in the Castro, and it fails because the business owners of the Castro don't want gay homeless youth there.
More recently, a new category of migrant has begun moving into the Castro: employees of San Francisco's new high-tech industries.
We're here in South of Market, or SoMa, the heart of San Francisco's software and technology industry. From a gentrification point of view, the companies that comprise SoMa came and brought with them very high-paying jobs. The workers who have filled those jobs need a place to live. This pressure has caused housing prices to soar throughout the city. But prices have risen especially high in certain neighborhoods, such as the Castro and the Mission. The Castro is in high demand for a couple of reasons. It's close to the South of Market district. But perhaps more importantly, and ironically, the fixed-up Victorians and the progressive and hip atmosphere that the gay community created during its own first wave of gentrification has made that neighborhood especially desirable to these newcomers. From a post-gay thesis point of view, these companies represent something different. They've brought with them technology that is changing the way society interacts with one another. People no longer feel the need for a geographic community when they have social networking apps to reach out and contact people and, well, frankly, look for dates.
GLBT History Museum docent Jonathan Swain, asks museum visitors whether a gay neighborhood is still needed.
People of my generation and older, yes, a gay neighborhood is necessary in its time. I ask that same question of those who are, frankly, a generation younger than me, middle schoolers, and their answer is, not really. And why is that, I ask? Well, I already have all the acceptance I need. I'm assimilated. My friends at junior high school and high school know that I'm out. I don't need to clump together. I want to live next to my friends who may be straight. As far as meeting people, all I have to do is this, then go to Grindr, and go to Tinder, and go to Facebook and meet somebody. I don't have to sit in a bar.
We're here in the Mission, outside the Lexington Club right behind me. Through the years, the Mission has become the home of a high concentration of lesbians. The Lex was the last remaining lesbian bar in the city, and its closure illustrates both theses that we've been talking about. On the one hand, the owner had to close her doors because of rising rents in this rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. On the other hand, it lost customers as lesbians moved away from the Mission and no longer needed bars to find each other.
Between the post-gay thesis and the gentrification thesis, for me, the answer is clear, right? I think that as a society, we want to imagine that this is about the whole society becoming a place where gay people can live. And that's to some extent true. But this is really about the ways that larger economic forces are pushing the people out of the neighborhood who do want to live in that gay neighborhood. Because there are a lot of reasons why many people, both the people who've lived there a long time and newcomers, would want to have that sense of belonging and community, even in a society that's more welcoming of gay people.
Dr. Romsberg clarifies 5 reasons why, from the gay community's perspective, the Castro needs to remain a gay neighborhood.
The first one is that gays and lesbians will always be a numerical minority. We only make up a small percentage of the population. So to have a concentrated voting bloc in a neighborhood like that allows us to have a voice that is amplified far beyond our numbers relative to society. And that's a really important thing for making sure that our voices and our issues are always part of the agenda. The second thing that I think is very important is that it continues to be a site of important belonging and community and camaraderie in a time when, for so many of us across society, the idea of being able to be in a community where you have shared values is becoming increasingly diffuse, right? Social media isn't enough. Sometimes you need to have a place to come home. The third reason I think it's really important is because globally, it represents a kind of possibility of LGBT belonging. I'm really struck as one of the curators of the GLBT Historical Society's museum, how in the guest book, time and time again, what people write about going to the museum and going to the Castro is that it represents to them something that they can't have back home. It represents a place of possibility. And I think it's important to keep that possibility alive. The fourth reason is really about memory. Not to lock the Castro in the past, but to recognize that it was a place where a community rose up in the face of the AIDS crisis and responded with great courage and power. And it deserves to be remembered as this place that was so central to organizing and feeling our way through these really, really dark times. And finally, although this has always been and may always be an unrealized vision of the Castro should represent a place of safety and possibility for marginalized queer people who otherwise don't have somewhere else to go. So I would like to envision a future Castro that has room for example, queer homeless youth. I would like it to be a place of multicultural belonging. Whether or not people can afford the houses there, which I don't think they can, I can't, it could be a space of nonprofits, of community making, of world making that helps sustain queer lives across San Francisco, across the Bay Area, and across the world.
Finally, Dr. Romsberg addresses what the Castro represents more broadly and why its demise would be a loss for San Francisco and us as a society.
The Castro represents, as problematic as it might be, this kind of vision of progressivism that means that LGBT people will be working in coalition with the African American community and the Chinese American community, working class people in San Francisco, as well as the political establishment, to be able to create this kind of liberal and diverse city that celebrates difference, celebrates the underdog, and celebrates possibilities. Those are values that are hard-won and difficult to find in other parts of the country. And the Castro is one of these important forces that allows San Francisco to retain that identity. It's all too easy to see a possibility of a future where what San Francisco represents is tech wealth and global finance, and becomes a kind of international playground for the very wealthy. It's a beautiful place to live and it's a beautiful place to visit, but I want it to be more than that. I want it to be a liberal, progressive bastion that says everybody has a right to belong. So I don't know what the solutions are to this. I think that creating more dormitory style housing, kind of innovative kinds of models would be part of it. I think that trying to intentionally cultivate a thriving LGBT arts and culture community in the Castro could be part of it. But none of these are easy to do. These are all very hard solutions, especially in a time when there is so much profit to be made off of every square inch of the neighborhood. So I don't know what's coming next.
Regardless of the forces you may feel are changing the Castro, remember just how important this community is to San Francisco locally and to the broader gay community globally. The Castro is faced with a challenge to keep the significant place relevant in modern times.
In this film, we introduced the Castro as one of the first gay safe havens, described how it became a center of political power for gays locally and nationally, explored the gentrification and post-gay theses explaining its decline, explained why the Castro's identity as a gay community is still relevant and necessary, and finally argued that San Francisco and the world needs the Castro and what it represents just as much as the gay community does.